Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. Yesterday, Owlcat released an AMA, Ask Me Anything, where they answered a ton of questions. Now, let me say right up front, I did a video on an AMA last year that kind of kind of shut things down for a little bit. Owlcat ended up reaching out to me to say, hey, can you update a couple of these things? People are going crazy, blah, 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 blah. I don't think there's anything like world breaking in this particular AMA that they've done. I think they probably combed through their answers a little bit more closely. It's more so consistently, oh, this is really interesting. Oh, this is really cool. Oh, I'm glad that they answered that kind of stuff, right? The biggest news that probably came out of this AMA is that Owlcat is planning to do multiple reveals this year. So, of course, we know Owlcat is currently developing 4 games, and we know very, very little about them, except that one is being made in Unreal Engine and it's going to be fully cinematic, which will be a first for Owlcat. And we also know that all 4 of these releases will have full voice acting, which is something that Owlcat has never done. And then finally, we know that the major game they're working on is going to be a CRPG, and it is sci-fi. Although we're not sure what is the exact IP they're working on. But other than that, we have no information regarding these games, and there is no additional information provided in the AMA regarding these games, other than, again, we'll find out more later on this year. So very, very exciting. Outside of that, I just think there's a long list of really cool stuff. It's a large AMA. I'm going to have some footage playing while I'm reading through this, but it's definitely one of those videos that you don't have to watch. You could just listen to if you want. You can, of course, skip around based on the chapters that are down below, but honestly, there's going to be a lot of answers that are grouped together in some of these sections, so you could very easily miss something that is important to you. So this is one of the rare videos that I would kind of tell you, just go ahead and listen to it all the way from the beginning to the end, because you'll probably come across some things that I didn't necessarily tag in the chapters. With all that being said, oh, one more thing. There will be spoilers in this AMA. They're going to reference things that have happened in all 3 games. I don't feel like any of it is like major spoilers where you will be disappointed and not want to play the game if you hadn't already played it. But just want to throw that out there. I'm not going to be dancing around the answers that they provide. All right, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The first section that I want to start with is apologies. There are a few areas where fans have told me multiple times they feel like Owlcat dropped the ball, and they definitely felt some way about it. And in this AMA, Owlcat was asked about this, and they gave pretty direct answers, or at least more direct than I've ever heard before. So let's go ahead and walk through them. The first question: why did you all abandon Kingmaker on the console, leaving it in a nearly unplayable state, and remove the old forums where hundreds of people left questions, begging for answers about it ever being looked at? The answer Owlcat provided is, we developed the game while being part of a larger publishing company, and after we went independent in 2019, the rights remained with the publisher. Console version was released during the transfer period, and we did our best at supporting and fixing the game for as long as we could. We continued for a few months even after any revenue was cut off, but eventually further support became impossible. Ever since those times, we don't receive any revenue from the game, don't have any control over what happens with it, and can't make any updates. Despite all efforts, any attempts to reclaim the rights were futile so far. We are really sorry, but there's little we can do about it. Old forums were deleted because they largely became obsolete as most of our audience moved on to other platforms. There was also a question later on in this AMA about, hey, Owlcat, you've become a publisher now. Obviously, you're working with more money. Haven't you been able to purchase back the rights to Kingmaker yet? And they made it clear that no, they have tried, they've reached out, but at this time, they have not been able to come to a deal. Now, that might surprise some of you, considering the state Kingmaker is in and how early they made that game. But for those of you who have been paying attention to the news, it's probably not surprising because a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, it was announced Kingmaker just crossed the 2 million units sold mark. So it is officially Owlcat's highest selling game, even though Owlcat doesn't get any revenue from it. I thought the press release that was provided announcing that 2 million units have been sold was rather ugly. The publisher who owns it currently made no mention of Owlcat whatsoever. It almost seemed like they tried to pass it off as their own game. So I kind of get the feeling that Owlcat going independent was not looked upon favorably by the publisher. They probably wanted Owlcat to just keep making games for them. And so some of the relationship issues might be contributing to why Owlcat has not been able to purchase back those rights. It's created a very, very unfortunate situation where the state of the game on consoles is absolutely unacceptable. To be honest with you, even on PC, I wouldn't really call Kingmaker like all the way stable. I love the game. I played through the game. I highly recommend, if you haven't already, you play through the game, especially if you enjoyed Wrath of the Righteous and Rogue Trader. But yeah, it's a very unfortunate situation, so Owlcat definitely needed to apologize about this. Next up, there's also been a lot of questions regarding the Xbox and why the Xbox Series X hasn't gotten the performance update that is available on PlayStation 5. Specifically, the question is, will we ever get an Xbox Series X texture resolution upgrade for Wrath of the Righteous in the way that PS5 got an upgrade? After Kingmaker was abandoned, I've read and understand why, and now we have the only unoptimized 9th gen console version of Wrath of the Righteous. It does feel bad to be an Owlcat fan on Xbox. Owlcat's answer was, that's a complicated one. Pathfinder 2, meaning Wrath of the Righteous, is a massive technical challenge to optimize for consoles. When we assessed the possibility of an upgrade to 9th gen for Xbox, we ran into having to switch the whole project to newer versions of Unity libraries. Unfortunately, that exploded the game in erratic and unpredictable ways, to a point where we realized that fixing all of it would potentially paralyze any other work on the project for months. Between DLCs being still in development at that point and the relatively small size of the game team, we were forced to choose the lesser evil and freeze development of this upgrade. Unfortunately, we never really had the opportunity or resources to get it back so far. We are really sorry for letting the Xbox players down like that. This was a major learning point for us, which made us implement significant improvements to the process for console version development in Rogue Trader, which doesn't have any such issues. And there you have it. So many of you have reached out regarding the state of Wrath of the Righteous on Xbox and made it clear that you are very disappointed. So I know this is an answer, an apology that you would really want to see. And I do concur with Owlcat. From everything I've heard, Rogue Trader is a significantly superior experience on console compared to Wrath of the Righteous and obviously Kingmaker. So I know this answer doesn't necessarily make a lot of you who are on Xbox happy, but at least you can be relatively confident going forward that Owlcat won't make the same mistakes when it comes to console releases. Last on the list, as far as apologies, is the overall state of games that Owlcat releases. So the question is, for your upcoming games, do you plan on continuing to rely on your paid customers for your QA after releasing a barely playable game? Lest we forget, Rogue Trader released riddled with game-breaking bugs where many players couldn't even progress through the game and just quit. The answer from Owlcat is, it's absolutely fair to be bitter and frustrated about the game's technical quality at release. Frankly, we were frustrated ourselves, not expecting so many issues to slip through. For that, we sincerely apologize. We did our best at delivering the fixes as soon as possible, working closely with the community to set priorities. We have also made a lot of alterations and improvements to our internal processes since then, which resulted in a largely flawless launch of the first DLC, Void Shadows. We hope that the renewed approach will help us prevent any issues of such scale in the future. Thank you for being with us even after our mistakes. I'll be perfectly honest, and this probably won't surprise those of you who have been watching my content for a regular basis. This is the area that gives me pause. I'm cool with Owlcat being a publisher. I'm definitely a little hesitant and a little shaky about them developing 4 games all at once. When you've released 3 games, and from my perspective, they've never had a stable launch. They have never had a launch where I was like, all right, this is acceptable. There are bugs, there are things that need to be fixed, but on the whole, this released in a quality state. Like, all of their games released in a state where there are a large number of people who couldn't finish the game on day one, right? And that includes Rogue Trader. And Rogue Trader undoubtedly had the best launch out of all the other games, right? So I definitely understand people are frustrated by this. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how will the quality and stability of their launches be impacted by all of these plates they're trying to balance at the same time. We'll see. All right, I want to get the apologies right out the way, and there's one other section I want to get out the way right up front, and that's the kind of content Owlcat will not be doing. Some of this is a repeat from the last AMA, but I know many of you probably didn't see that video. So here we're going to spin the block on some of the IPs Owlcat has no plans of working with thus far, and a couple of new ones that were added with the answers they provided in the AMA. Shadowrun, Warcraft, World of Darkness, and Starfinder IPs are awesome, but not currently in development. There are very few Owlcat devs playing Starfinder, so the studio is not particularly enthusiastic about potentially doing that game. Owlcat also is not working on an Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy, Horus Heresy, 30K, or Old World RPG, but they are excited about the possibility of those games. They are also not working on Icewind Dale 3 or Neverwinter Nights 3, although either one would be fun if they received an opportunity. They are not developing any Pathfinder games currently, but maintain warm relations with Paizo. Currently, they are not developing their own IP. They also have no plans to create their own mechanic system from scratch for an upcoming game. There are no current plans to expand cutscenes for romances in Rogue Trader or Wrath of the Righteous. There are no plans to add jump packs to Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. The maps aren't big enough, and it will require a ton of work to make them viable. Owlcat does find the idea intriguing and may try to make it work for future content. There are no plans to add voiceover in other languages to Owlcat games due to the massive expense of that undertaking. They are only just now moving towards full English voiceovers. Owlcat has no plans to use AI-generated art or AI voice acting. If Owlcat could make any Pathfinder AP into a game, they would like to do Iron Gods, but it's unlikely to happen. Ooh, that's interesting. So looks like I hit the money. I made a video a few months ago picking the 5 Pathfinder APs that I would like Owlcat to do, and Iron Gods is one of them. I think the story is super, super cool, and it's right up Owlcat's alley. They've already dibbled and dabbled with some of the lore that you will go into in Iron Gods in the Kingmaker game. So I think it would be really, really interesting to see them go this route. Now, the answer does not clarify why they believe making an Iron Gods game is unlikely. I can only think of 2 reasons. One, obviously they're not working on a Pathfinder game right now, and it's not clear if they ever will again. But 2, even more importantly, if they made another Pathfinder game, you've got to think about power scaling, right? You just had Wrath of the Righteous with all those mythic powers. You might kind of need to go to another game that's going to give players that similar feeling of becoming this all-powerful being towards the end. So I feel like Wrath of the Rune Lords or an AP of that nature is probably much more likely than Iron Gods, but it would be great to get a more official answer from Owlcat about why they believe an Iron Gods game probably is never in the cards for them. Moving on to the next section, there are a couple of questions that deal more with scrapped content. things that Owlcat thought about doing but ended up deciding not to. Wrath of the Righteous DLC didn't include new races with companions because that content is significantly more difficult to add than just providing new classes. In hindsight, Owlcat believes adding new races would have been better received than some of the DLC they chose to do, but obviously there's no way to change that. It was so interesting to hear this because I 100% agree. Cannot tell you how many people have reached out wishing that Wrath of the Righteous had Ratfolk. So many people seem to really be disappointed when Ratfolk lost the contest between, I think it was Ratfolk, Kitsune, and I can't remember what was the third race. There's a third race in there, but Kitsune ended up winning out. Speaking of which, I don't talk about it later, but there was another question about if Ratfolk had won instead of Kitsune, would we still have had Nanio as a companion? And the answer actually is no. If Ratfolk had won, then Owlcat would have had to figure out a completely new companion to fit in with that race, which is actually kind of interesting. But yeah, I definitely feel like adding more races would have been more positively received than some of the DLC they tried to do. But again, hindsight is 50-50. The other note regarding scrap content is companions in Rogue Trader. So Owlcat said at one point, Rogue Trader companions were going to include a Slanesh Daemonette and a heretic cultist witch, but they didn't fit into the scope and narrative of the story, so they were scrapped early. There was also a chance the Nocturne of Oblivion would become a companion, but once his personality was fully developed, Owlcat decided he made more sense as an NPC. I hate this. I think it was a mistake. They talk a little bit later about the heretic path and how it needs to be updated and made better. I feel like a big issue with being a heretic in Rogue Trader is that for the vast majority of party members you have, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that they stick around, and it doesn't make sense they don't have more reactivity to what you're doing. And this would be helped significantly by having more party members who were flat out chaotic, or at least lean more chaotic, so it made more sense that they would just go with the flow regardless of what you were doing. As it stands, you'll almost certainly have people in your party where you're like, you should be more disgusted by some of the things that I'm doing. All right, the next section is future plans. What are some of the things in the future that Owlcat plans to do? The success of Baldur's Gate 3 did not have a significant impact on Owlcat's future plans. Owlcat will branch out in some of their games beyond CRPGs. However, those games will still be narrative driven with complex mechanics. They will also continue developing isometric CRPGs. A question was asked, how does Owlcat go about choosing a new franchise to work with? First, there must be a group of skilled professionals inside the studio who are really enthusiastic about that franchise and ready to become the driving core behind its development. So I mentioned when we talked in the last AMA that Owlcat has now adopted almost a musical chair style of development, where devs can kind of move back and forth between different projects depending on what they're passionate about and aren't necessarily locked in to doing something or working on something that they're not really passionate about anymore. And Owlcat really believes this is going to assist them in making their games even better. We'll see. Number 2, there must be enough people to assemble the full team, or at least an opportunity to hire more people. 3, the franchise needs to be popular enough or have a good growth potential, or simply excite the team beyond comprehension. And then finally, realistic opportunities must exist to obtain the license for that franchise with reasonable terms. Moving on to Rogue Trader, Lex Imperialis, which is the next DLC for Rogue Trader that should be coming out later this year, doesn't have an exact release date yet, but it's scheduled for a late spring release. New portraits will be added with the DLC, and it will provide additional star systems to explore. The new companion will also be romanceable for any gender. When Owlcat provided this answer, they also asked, do you like dogs? So seems like a hint that maybe we're getting pets or something of that sort. There was also a question regarding, will we see more Rogue Trader content beyond the Lex Imperialis DLC? And Owlcat answered that Rogue Trader will continue to be supported as long as fans purchase the content and devs are not needed on other projects, potentially as long as Wrath of the Righteous. Void Shadows, the most recent Rogue Trader DLC, was very well received, and the game has sold 1 million copies. Owlcat also confirmed that Games Workshop, the owner of Warhammer, is really happy with how the game turned out. DLC survey results will assist in figuring out what that content should look like. Owlcat recently released a survey specifically asking people what kind of Rogue Trader DLC they would like to receive. So if you haven't filled that out yet, there's a community post on YouTube where I provided that link, or I'm also on Twitter. You can see it there as well. Increasing the void chip size will require a major overhaul of the system and is unlikely to happen. Owlcat is aware many players believe Ulfar is weak due to his lack of gear options, and they are looking at upgrading itemization options for both him and Eurolan in the future. Owlcat is also aware that many players believe the Heretic run should be improved, and while they don't promise a major overhaul, they do plan to polish some areas based on player feedback. It's possible Owlcat will rework the existing origins in Rogue Trader, as some of them, such as Naval Officer, feel bland and underpowered. And then finally, for future games, Owlcat would like to expand their mod support beyond what they provided for Rogue Trader. Alright, that's everything in the AMA that I felt like would really stand out in regards to what they plan to do in the future. Now let's look at general game development. How is Owlcat going about the process of making their games? Owlcat is developing one game in Unreal Engine, but they will continue using Unity as well. Some of their teams will specialize in Unity, while others will focus on Unreal Engine. Shadow of the Road, one of 2 games Owlcat is publishing, is currently being created in Unity by developer Another Angle Games. Owlcat games will continue to focus on the player having positions of power. They like how you can influence the world. They will also continue to focus on romances. There was a question regarding what lessons have they learned from past games, and Owlcat answered that Kingmaker was the first time many of them had developed a game, so there were a ton of lessons from that experience. Also, Rogue Trader was very eye-opening and how broken player builds could potentially be. Seems like Owlcat was definitely caught off guard by this. There was also a question comparing the alpha version of Rogue Trader to the full release version. In the alpha version, the mechanics were much closer to tabletop, with overall numbers being lower and psyker powers not being limited to staffs. Owlcat said in the full release they used a more homebrewed mechanic system because what was there didn't work for a full 80+ hour experience. Some didn't provide a space power fantasy, or they were just flat out bad. Owlcat has a strong history of adding accessibility options in their game, and they plan to expand on that in the future. Some of these options were added based on direct feedback, such as varying font sizes, text coloring options, and adjustments of different sounds for people with misophonia. There are people with color blindness and other disabilities who work at Owlcat. There was also a question in regards to what sort of concessions Owlcat might make based on now doing full voiceovers. Many of you have reached out concerned about this, feeling like Owlcat moving towards having fully voiced over games is going to result in their games being significantly smaller. And so let's talk about that question. The specific question is, your games, meaning Owlcat games, are known for being extremely complex. You recently spoke about full voiceover plans, which is great for accessibility, but won't the variety of dialogues and amount of text suffer if you add full voiceover like in BG3? Wasn't there an accessibility versus complexity argument inside the team? Do you think accessibility may harm the game in some way? Owlcat's answer is, in regards to CRPGs, we don't plan to significantly change our approach to dialogues to make them more suitable for voiceover, and plan to simply allocate more resources on it. Other genres may have shorter dialogues where relevant. So I gotta be honest with you, I'm just not among the group that is worried about this. The top two games all time, as far as amount of words, are Baldur's Gate 3 and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Both of these games are fully voice acted. And as far as I know, Kingmaker, Wrath of the Righteous, and Rogue Trader are not even close. They were not even close to consideration for that Guinness World Record. So there's ample evidence that you can have fully voiceover games. There's ample evidence that you can have games which are fully voiced over and at the same time have a ton of complex, fascinating dialogue that players will love to experience. It'll all come down to whether or not Owlcat is good at balancing all these different games at the same time. We won't know until hopefully later on this year when they give us another game. There was also a question regarding what was learned from the Wrath of the Righteous DLC reception. The Last Icorians and A Dance of Mass were the most successful DLCs. Owlcat believes players enjoy the DLCs most when they contain content for every type of player instead of a single category such as mechanics. They also believe players prefer when DLCs are deep on narrative and integrated into the game rather than offering a side story. DLCs should also be lighter on puzzles. I'll be honest, I kind of agree and disagree on this answer. I agree that The Last Icorians and A Dance of Mass were the best DLCs that Wrath of the Righteous offered, and that part of the appeal was how they expanded the main game, as you played. But personally, I'm a massive fan of post-game expansions. I really enjoy where a game allows you to see what happened after the ending, play through quests, follow up with people like Blood and Wine in The Witcher 3. Amazing. It allows you to really close out the story well. And I know in Owlcat games, because they provide you with such a wide variety of endings, it's really hard to do that kind of content. It's easier for them to do DLCs that just apply to the main story and don't deal with post-game stuff. But I can't help what I personally prefer. I'm definitely of the opinion that expansions are the way to go if you can do them. Next up, Owlcat was asked if there's an area of their games that they're dissatisfied with. And in a surprising answer, Owlcat said that they are almost universally disappointed with how Crusade management turned out in Wrath of the Righteous. Even after multiple updates, they were never able to get it to the point where they wanted it to be. That answer is so interesting to me because even though I'm not crazy about Crusade management, I do believe that it's implemented significantly better than Kingdom management from Kingmaker. Even though there's some aspects of Kingdom management, such as the curses, that I really kind of miss, and I feel like could have been better implemented into the Crusade management. But overall, I feel like considering where they technically started, they found a way to make it much more enjoyable, much more interesting. But obviously, they're still not happy with it. There are no questions in this AMA about how they feel regarding void ship combat. I wonder how they feel about that and whether or not they enjoy the way that's implemented, or if they're still trying to find that game that has that management system that they finally believe is perfect and reflective of what they really wanted players to experience. Next up, a question was asked, what was the response to Rogue Trader being mostly turn-based? And Owlcat said that they believe their fans vastly prefer turn-based over real-time with pause by almost a 70-30 split. There were very few complaints, according to them, regarding Rogue Trader only being turn-based. That is a shocking answer to me, because definitely in my comments, I see people complaining about turn-based all the time. Now, me personally, I prefer turn-based, but I'll play anything. You all know I played through Pillars of Eternity. I always played it real-time with pause because obviously it's built to be real-time with pause. But there were definitely people who I've heard complaining about Rogue Trader being only turn-based, and frankly, Baldur's Gate 3 only being turn-based. In fact, I remember a sizable amount of people asking, hey, can we get a mod or an update or something that will make this game real-time with pause, which I'm not even sure if that's even possible. But it's very interesting to hear Owlcat say, no, we strongly strongly believe that our audience really prefers turn-based combat. I wonder if that's based on the survey results or if they're looking at reviews or things of that nature. Very interesting answer. And then finally, there was another question regarding lessons they've learned from developing in each game. And I thought this answer was crazy powerful, so I wanted to include it here. The question is, after developing 3 amazing games, what do you think is the biggest lesson the team has learned while developing each game? And Owlcat said, make the games you are yourself excited with and be honest with yourself and your audience. I love that answer. I think that answer is incredible, really powerful, and there are just not enough studios that stand on that. People have asked or left comments many times asking, why is it that I do those videos sometimes that they feel like basically dives into drama and dives into talking about people who they feel like, hey, you could shy away from these situations. It's going to attract a certain type of people into your comments, all that kind of stuff. The reason why I do it is I feel very strongly devs should make the type of games that they want. Devs should be able to make the exact type of games that they want. If you want to make a game like Wrath of the Righteous, you should be able to do it. If you want to make a game like Assassin's Creed Shadows, you should be able to do it. If you want to make a game like Baldur's Gate 3, you should be able to do it. If you want to make a game like Veilguard, you should be able to do it. And you should be able to do it without being constantly harassed and pulled down and tore down and having all these boycotts done about your product. But at the same time, studios need to stand on what they create. And unfortunately, what we see a lot of is studios making games that have aspects of them that you know you're going to have to fight for, that you know there's a segment of the gaming population that's going to be very upset, and you're going to have to show like, hey, my game is fantastic with this content in it. And studios then do a terrible job of standing up for what they say they believe in. So you need to have the whole sentence. You can't just have one part. Make the games you are excited with and be honest with yourself and your audience. Sometimes, unfortunately, that second part gets kind of lost and studios aren't just direct and upfront about what it is they're trying to do. Hopefully, we'll see many more studios adopt this kind of motto and present themselves like this when they're trying to market their games. All right, that's the last of the big sections. So this final one is just general notes that I felt like some of you might find interesting. Games Workshop will not consider the Rogue Trader events canon in part because there are several different endings you could potentially receive. Community manager Starrock said his favorite quest in Wrath of the Righteous is the one where you heal Targona's corrupted wing, and his favorite non-Owlcat quest is the Hag storyline from Baldur's Gate 3 because it was creepy to perfection. Baldur's Gate 3 is the most non-Owlcat game played by the studio in both 2023 and 2024. They also mentioned in a separate part of the AMA that they have close relations with some of the members of Larian Studios in response to a question about the possibility of Larian Studios and Owlcat games combining together to make the ultimate RPG. Owlcat threw cold water on that and said it's not enough to just throw talented people in the same room together. You also have to consider a ton of other factors, so the possibility of this is unlikely. Owlcat was surprised by how popular Abelard has become and how much fans enjoyed his introductions. That's fascinating to me to hear, because the introductions from Abelard when I played Rogue Trader, immediately I was like, this is awesome. This is awesome. To me, I know everybody doesn't agree, but to me, playing as a noble officer who's dogmatic in Rogue Trader is the ultimate playthrough. The ultimate playthrough. Abelard in front, making your introductions, Argenta on one side, Heinrichs on the other. We're taking over everything on behalf of the Emperor. That is the playthrough that makes the most sense. And having Abelard introduce you every single time when you're playing as a noble character is pure perfection. So freaking cool. And honestly, I can't think of a game that provides a similar dynamic between the main player and one of the party members. Just awesome all the way around. Historically, Owlcat hasn't revealed which companions were written by which writers due to uncomfortable attention directed at those individuals. Again, harassing folks because they don't write things that you want them to write, or even worse, you love certain characters so much, and so you try to develop unhealthy relationships with the people who are writing them. Chill out, y'all. Chill out. And then the very last question that I felt was worth noting is actually about Ember. So the specific question is, I've long believed that the best way to interpret Ember is as a philosophical pessimist, someone who rejects hope, expects the worst to happen, and finds great joy in being alive. Did her author set out to portray a philosophical pessimist? And if so, which philosopher was she based upon? And the writer for Ember answers, she is indeed a pessimist, but one who has gone all the way through despair to find kindness at the other side. You can call her an anti-nihilist, believing that in absence of hope, we have nothing left but to take care of each other. Compared to real-world philosophies, she falls somewhere close to existentialism. Of course, I didn't write her starting with the thought, let's make her a little magic Juan Paul Sartre, but existentialism is a humanism has affected me as a person, which might have translated into the way I wrote her. That is fascinating background on Ember as a character. Honestly, I feel like Ember is your best written party member in a group of really, really well-written party members. And this just adds to it some background information regarding how her thought process came about that I honestly wouldn't have expected or predicted. But that ends the AMA. That's all the answers that I felt like were really, really noteworthy and that you all would probably want to talk through. Of course, this is not all the answers that Owlcat provided, so please hit that link in the description. Check it out for yourself. Leave me your comments and your thoughts down below. If you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that like button. Obviously, it took quite a bit of work to put this all together. I read through a whole wall of questions to put this together for you all, so I would appreciate a little love back. But as always, I appreciate you all stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.